As a technology leader, imagine how you could further your leadership and your career if you were plugged in to a group of peers with a growth mindset. Imagine what you could discover by meeting weekly, having real conversations, and building genuine relationships. That is what we are doing with elevate150.com. Remember, life change happens in the context of relationships. Apply today at elevate150.com.
Hello, my friends. Today, Joel is talking to Gerald Kane, a professor at Boston College and a co-author of the book, The Transformation Myth. And they discuss how digital transformation is a never-ending journey, not a destination. How handling extreme disruption has changed the workplace, and what the future of hybrid workplaces could look like. All of this right here, right now, on the Modern CTO Podcast.
Here we go. This is the Modern CTO Podcast.
I got the branded background. Yeah, you know it, man. I am a professional book writer now.
I love it. Is this book number 2?
This is book number 2.
Why didn't you just get it right the first time?
Well, pandemic happened in between. So, we were, the first focus of the first book was on digital transformation. And we realized as we were pitching the follow-up book that a lot of what we had previously researched really was relevant to what we were all dealing with. And so we made this pitch in March of 2020. Like, we already had the meeting set up. And we called an audible in our pitch meeting and said, what if we investigated how companies were responding to COVID? And they said, that's great. We just need it done by November. And it was like, oh, crap, what have we gotten ourselves into? So we wrote a book about the pandemic as we were living through the pandemic. So it was quite an experience.
Yeah, I noticed you had a couple of co-authors. How does all of that come together?
As far as our working relationship, or just how did we meet each other?
Are you like, hey, I want to write a book on this topic, and you just start messaging people that you know? Or like, how do you get it together?
So my co-author, Ann Phillips, and I have been working. She's a Deloitte. She works at Deloitte, and we have been working together for about 8 or 9 years on various ongoing research projects. And we wrote the first book together. And Jonathan Kopolsky, who is one of the co-authors, was sort of the sponsor of all this research originally. And so we had been working together, and in fact, we had decided to, go our separate ways and sort of do our own, explore our independent projects. But then we had this idea to sort of write about how companies were leading through the pandemic, and we realized we just needed all hands on deck for this. And so we got the band back together. One new co-author, a guy named Rich Nanda, who's the head of Deloitte's Monitor strategy practice. And he was invaluable for getting us good contacts, sort of getting us a team to work on this book so we could execute it. I mean, we went from concept to finished product in 8 months. And so that was work. And we needed all the resources we could get to make that happen.
Have you done the Audible yet?
I have not. I asked, in fact, we talked about this last time when I was on, and I'm still mad that they won't let me do the Audible version, because I think I'd be good at it, but they ultimately hired somebody better than I would ever be. So it works out well.
I was saying, like, we have the time. We could just start recording it now.
We could just start reading.
Just start reading time.
Once upon a time in the land of, in the COVID times. But, it's interesting. I went back and listened to our podcast from a year ago, and it's so strange as to how much is exactly the same as where we were a year ago, and how much is entirely different. And it was just a weird sort of juxtaposition of, we're in the same places were with the pandemic this year, but we've learned so much and we've come so far.
Tell me more, man. I'm interested now.
Well, when we last talked, there were no vaccines. I was getting ready to start an academic year, not knowing what the hell was in store for us, because it was all chaos. And now we have a year under our belt, and you're looking back, and now we have vaccines, which are great. And, we've gone through a whole political turmoil over the last year or so, change as far as that goes. And yet we're still sort of wrestling with the pandemic and its forces. And so it's just an interesting, it was a weird combination of very similar and also very different.
Yeah. Yeah. I try not to get like political on the show, right?
Yes.
But at the same time, what's happening that I think is interesting that I didn't see when I was growing up. So I'm 33, right? And so what I didn't see growing up, and I wasn't necessarily looking for it, but businesses taking stances on like political things a whole lot.
Yes.
But now it seems it's almost like required or expected. And, I'm very interested in business, as you are. And I've been watching, this mandate that Biden announced. I've been watching how the businesses are responding to it. Right. And they're asking for like clarification and all of these things. There's a lot of like gray areas, but this whole new thing of work needing to take a stand on positions. I don't like it personally.
Yeah. And it's a slippery slope because if you start taking a stance, then not taking a stance is taking a stance.
I know.
And so but then again, there's some things you almost have to take a stance on. And so it's a tough time. And actually one thing that was really, I also try not to get political either. But, the government leadership of whatever side, I think, has really dropped the ball on over the entire past year on both sides, of coming together and casting a real vision for the community. And one of the things that was inspiring about the book was the number of corporate leaders that really did step up and offer genuine leadership in a time of uncertainty and a time of crisis and a time when people were afraid. And I had so many inspiring interviews with people who just were doing it right. And so when I looked at the political environment and just got so disheartened as to all the infighting and such like that, to then look at the corporate leaders who were actually sort of inspiring and comforting and having empathy to their employees, just was amazing. And I think we are living through what will be known as the golden age of corporate leadership, because in that absence of political leadership, corporate leaders have really stepped up and I think done some amazing things. And not even about taking stances on issues, but about making sure, they watched out for their customers and their employees, and did so in some remarkable ways. I got good stories if you want to hear any of them.
Yeah, please share.
So one great one was the health insurer Humana. So insurance company, health insurance. And they realized in the early days of the pandemic, by, monitoring the calls that were coming in, that food insecurity was a big issue for their customer base. And they went back and said, look, our mission, I don't remember what their mission is, but our mission is to support the health of our customers. And how can we say we're supporting the health if they don't have enough food? And so Humana, nobody expected them to do this, but they basically ramped up the capacity to do meal provision at scale and delivered over 1 million meals to its members over the course of the first 3 months of the pandemic. And so this is a health insurance company. This isn't what they do. And so they had to sort of figure it out. They solved the problem. And it was just because they perceived a need in the community that was relevant to their mission, even though they had to completely reinterpret how to enact that mission in this environment. And there are lots of stories like that of companies sort of rethinking things. Because the pandemic upended things, companies were forced to rethink and did so in some really remarkable ways. Another great one is Beam Suntory. And I talked to those guys. So they pivoted and started making hand sanitizer in the early days. And they said, we know we're not medical doctors. We're not going to save the world, but this is one thing we can do. And I heard that story And I thought, yeah, of course, an alcohol company can make hand sanitizer. It was a non-trivial problem for them to solve, and they really needed to devote considerable time and effort to making it happen. They had to work things out with U.S. regulators because it wasn't even clear if they were legally allowed to do it, and whether they'd be taxed if they did it and gave it away. And so there are all sorts of that. And then there are the logistics of how do you actually pull this off? And it was really fascinating to hear from the guys that were describing this process. And they actually had to start working with their competitors to help make this happen because they all had to sort of brainstorm how to make this happen. And they said it was really weird to see emails coming in from our competitors' email addresses working on this shared project. And I just thought that was inspiring to like put the competitive nature and instinct away and let's work together to solve the problem of the common good. And so just stories like that were just cool to tell, cool to hear about. And I will make one plug. If you go to my website, www.profkane.com. So my co-authors are from Deloitte, and we had so many good stories and good interviews that didn't make it into the book that we've been releasing them as a leadership series on the Wall Street Journal. And so there's a number of those where you can read these short anecdotes of what these leaders have done sort of in the midst of the pandemic.
Oh, that's pretty neat. Because you have to, that was my next question or something I was interested in knowing. Like, I do a lot of interviews, right? And they all vary, and they vary based on like the topic and the audience. And, you know, they're all good in their own way, right? And except for the ones that don't air. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Are you giving me a hint here, man?
Yeah.
I haven't made that. I better be good or I'm not making the cut.
Yeah. But like, how did you decide ultimately which stories went into the book? Because you had to do a lot. You had to do way more than you would need to use, right?
Yes. It just, when we heard a good story, you know, and some of the interviews, you know, it's funny. Some of the interviews I did, I got off and I said, well, that was a real stinker. That didn't work. And then I shelved it. And then, you know, as I'm writing a book, I always try to at least get one quote in from every person. I mean, that's just, they've given me their time. I at least need to sort of find some way to use that. And a couple of those, I went back several months after I interviewed and found some real gems in there that I just missed at the time. So it's either I wasn't paying close enough attention or my thinking evolved. But there wasn't, you have to show the full interviews. I just have to mine the gems out of them. I can't show the full interviews. So there was at least a couple of real gems in every one that we did. And then some were just extended good stories. And those are the ones we're elevating to Wall Street Journal.
Yeah. And the ones that are going to be relevant to, you know, the transformation that's happening right now. Right. And
yes,
help the most amount of people, because you want to, you know, you want to be useful to other people. You want them to, you know, learn from you and learn from these other companies.
Absolutely.
Hey, so I'm pretty sure that the topic of conversation we touched on a minute ago about taking a stance, like as a company, that's like not something you research regularly, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. So just to set my understanding, but I am curious.
Like, but I'm going to ask your opinion.
But I'm going to ask your opinion. Well, you interviewed, but here's what's on the top of my mind. When you're talking to these people and interviewing these people, does it ever come up like the complexity of the fact that people want their company to take a stand, but like, all right, super easy when you have 10 people, right?
Yeah.
Very difficult when you have 10,000 people. Was anyone like trying to figure out how to address that? Or because you talked about transformation, right? And one of the transformation points that I believe is a key point is companies either taking a stand or not taking a stand and addressing that. And so like, have you heard any conversation about how they're thinking?
Yeah. You know, most of what I heard in this time was, so, because, you know, we're also living through, one of the key points of the book is it's not just about COVID, it's about disruption. And if you think about the last year, we not only had COVID, we had political disruption. We're having, you know, racial discussions and protests about racial inequality. Climate change hasn't gone away. You know, we just had the, you know, 20th anniversary of 9/11. You know, which many people reference back, said, I know how to lead through this because I had to lead through that or the financial crisis. So we really want to make a point that it's not about COVID. It's about how do you lead your companies through disruption. And I've got a great quote for you here in a second, but I don't want to dodge your question. Most people that I spoke to did it in the context of their teams where they had relationships with people. Like, we're not going out and so one woman I talked to was head of something at Shell, and, British lady, and, the George Floyd stuff came up, and she just had a frank discussion with her team about how she felt about things. And, I think one of the real benefits of the past year, because we were all sort of rocked to our core, it enabled us to have, I heard authenticity and empathy over and over again in these conversations. And so I think we're at a really unique time to have those conversations. And if anything, at the local level, it's like the team level, it was let's set aside policies and position stances and get to know people as real people. And I think that's where, change, you're getting me off on a little bit of a soapbox. I think that's where change happens, is where we recognize each other as authentic individuals and not as the labels that social media or the labels that the press wants to put on them. I don't think anybody can be boiled down into, the easy soundbite talking points that we hear on a daily basis. And to break that, I think is critically important, to have, true community, which I think we've lost a little bit over the last several years.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I was talking about this for a long time, that we have lacked like a vision. Like when we went to, the moon for the first time, the whole country was like unified towards this vision. And personally, politically, I don't care. I just would like that sort of leadership on a national level. I would like our whole nation to be driving towards like one awesome thing,
Right. And if you look back to like just to the 9/11 stuff, and all of the unifying things that happened after that, compared to what we're dealing with COVID, where we're just infighting all the time. It's like, what has gotten us off from that sort of unified message where we can disagree, but, at the end of the day, we are all, whether, Americans or whether, part of a global community, we're getting off the subject a little bit, but where have we lost that? And I don't think it's unique to the U.S. I think it's broader.
So correct me if I'm wrong. So what you saw as sort of a trend with these leaders who were doing this well is that they were just being authentic, displaying empathy, and connecting with their direct reports and allowing conversations and discourse to happen, so that even if they didn't agree, they could all sort of achieve an understanding of each other's perspectives.
No, or just have a conversation and respect each other as individuals. My father is entirely different from me politically, but he's not going to stop being my father, and I'm not going to disown him because he disagrees with me politically. We just need more of that, type of relationship, I think, in multiple ways. And I think, when you're talking about leaders, I think what was really interesting to see was just how, particularly in the early stages, like March through May, where, basically the world was upended and all of our processes were disrupted, and how important mission became and how important communication became and how important it was. Like the CEO of Beam Suntory said, I didn't think I would ever communicate as often as I have been communicating. And the people really appreciated it. It's like, okay, we're scared. We don't know what to do. And that sort of vision, that communication, reiterating the mission of the organization, really. So I've never heard, the term North Star as many times as I did in all of our interviews, because people said, I didn't know what to do. So I just looked at this and tried to do the best that I could. And that's where I think the things like Humana came out, is that would have never happened in normal times. It was because everything else had been disrupted that there was the opportunity to do that. And what was really interesting is the number of people that I talked to, and this was so surprising to me, who saw it as just nothing but opportunity for their organization. That the disruption enabled them to do things that they've wanted to do for years. and haven't been able to do. And in fact, a lot of the data that's coming out says we've made 10 years worth of digital progress over the last 18 months.
Yeah. So I'm curious, I saw in the description of the book that you were talking about digital transformation. And then you mentioned some people, you said something along the lines of you can't just maintain the status quo. And when I saw that, I was like, who in the world is doing that? Have you actually seen people who are like, oh, we're just going to maintain the status quo and keep it cool?
Well, no, it's not maintain the status quo, but the minute I think there is a sizable population who, the minute we can go back to the way things were in December of 2019, they will jump at that chance to let's just get back to the way things were. And our key argument in the book is there is no going back to the way things were, or there's no going back and being competitively relevant. I think over the last 18 months, companies have developed so many new capabilities regarding digital, regarding experimentation, regarding working nimbly and agilely, that I think the next, whenever the hell we get out of this, and it was really challenging to write this book when it had to be submitted in December and not knowing what life was going to be like in September, that, whenever we get out of this, I think the next 3 to 5 years is going to be amongst the most interesting, innovative. We actually think the biggest disruption is yet to come, is once we are not restricted and locked down and need to be careful, it's going to be a competitive free for all. And as a business school professor, I'm looking forward to studying it. But if managers aren't prepared for that, for employees leaving because they don't like your work from home policies, whatever they are, I mean, there's no right answer. And all of these new competitors, startups that are going to come out of the woodwork, I just think we are looking forward to a really interesting 3 to 5 to 7 years of business competition coming ahead. And I think we have only just scratched the surface at this point.
Oh yeah, it's been crazy. Two of the things that come to mind for me are in my business. So we had, I think, 2 or 3 salespeople before the pandemic happened, and then we expanded and we grew a lot. And I think we had about 7 or 8 salespeople, and then that went well for like a year, and we grew the business. We doubled the revenue, and it was awesome. And then about a couple months ago, like 2 months ago, I had 4 of the salespeople of like the 7, like essentially come to me and say, "Hey, we want to go work back in an office again. So, we're going to take jobs in our local areas because they're open back up again." So no one talks about like these small businesses, like everyone's talking about people are upset because they don't want to go back into the office. And I'm like, that's not what's affecting my business. The opposite just impacted me in a great deal. And like, I haven't heard anybody talking about that.
It's age dependent. I mean, it's dependent on a lot of things, but age is a huge predictor. My undergrads absolutely want to go work in an office because their apartments suck. They don't necessarily like their roommates. It's their social time of life, and like it or not, work is a social time. The under 35 crowd doesn't like remote work. Me, I could never go back into the office, and I would be absolutely, I have my kids at home. I have a nice, comfortable home office, with transformation myth on the background here. I love working from home. And so and then personality is a different differentiator. And that's why I say there's no right answer here, because everybody wants different things, and the environment is blown up enough that they can find what it is they want. And so I think it's an important time for organization, for leaders to sit down and say, what sort of organization do we want to be? What sort of employees do we want to target? How do we shape these policies to make sure we're appealing to those people? I also think we're in a once in a lifetime opportunity to sort of be very intentional about the type of organizations we're developing. And I think if managers and leaders don't do that thinking now of, if I were a betting man, I'd say January 2022 is sort of what we're looking at for the new normal. If we don't do some thinking now as to what we want that to look like, we're going to mess some stuff up And you can't just say hybrid because there's like 25 different flavors of hybrid work, all of which have different pros and cons. And so I think it's a non-trivial problem.
Yeah, it's going to be crazy. I can't even figure out what January 2022 would look like. I think on one extreme, we let the government implant devices into us so they can just inject us with whatever chemicals that they want. Right? Because that was one of the things that I like to take things to extremes to better understand them. And I was like, all right, obviously I'm a huge fan of like the technology and the vaccines because I've got my brother and stepmom are both, doctors and we're nerds and we're interested in medical advancements and things. So I think those things are really fascinating. At the other point, I build product my whole life and I know that like you shouldn't rush product and I know what happens when you do rush product. And so like it's this tug of war with me. But then I was thinking like with the vaccines, like, all right, you get the vaccine, but then there's like a new variant and then you get another vaccine and then you get a new variant and then you get it's like when will this, if that occurs, there would, what would naturally be an emergent property of that situation would be a scale would be developed of severity.
Yes.
Right. And so I just like thinking about weird stuff like that because, it's legitimately impacting businesses today and business owners can no longer like not think about it. Period. Yeah. You just can't, you have to think about it now, especially if you have over 100 employees.
Absolutely. Now, see that your employees leaving was a good thing. So you don't have to think about that. But so I was talking, another organization I talked to, and I don't remember exactly which one, went into the pandemic with 10 employees. It was one of these businesses that experienced hyper growth because of the hybrid, ended up at 100. Well, what happened, before the pandemic, they were emphasizing their strong office culture. Obviously, they don't go back into the office. And when they ramp up from 10 to 100 employees, they hire from all over the US because the talent's out there. And now, as we're approaching the end, those early employees want to go back to that strong office culture. But then you have 90% of your company that doesn't live around you anymore. And so you can't solve that problem in traditional ways. I actually think one thing we're going to see, talk about the multiple types of hybrids. I'm pulling for like the destination organization where everybody works from home. And then 1 week a month, you go to New York, LA, Vegas, and you have 1 week of on-site where everybody does all their meetings. You go out to dinner at night and you have an intensive 3 to 5 days together. And then you go back off on your own for another, the rest of the month and do your work on your own. And then you save money on offices. You can have some cool destinations, team building activities. So, there are creative ways to think about this outside the box.
So we were in person in office before the pandemic. And then we all, went out of the office and just worked from home, except for me. Like I was the only one that would go into the office, right? Because it was safe because no one else was there. But
yeah, because it was the only one.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the interesting things we did was we said, all right, well, once a quarter, let's just get everyone together. And then we started getting more employees. Like I said, we had that rapid expansion. So we would like fly people in. And so for us, the resolution of quarterly worked pretty well. And so that's what we do. Like at the end of every quarter, we all get together in the same location and it will like, we did one in Nebraska where we had some people, we did one in Florida where we had, and so we're finding these like interesting places to go and get together. And because those relationships and the time you spend together is no matter how many Zoom calls you do, you can't understand these employees that you've hired until you sit down and have a meal with them and like listen to them talking to each other. There's just so much data there.
Yeah, there's a lot. I'm a big digital guy, so I'm all for it. And I still would not advocate a remote only organization because I think there's too much there's too much value in the face-to-face. Now, I think we overdid face-to-face before. It's like, you don't need face-to-face for everything. Meetings are like one really good example. But brainstorming sessions, product planning sessions, coaching and mentoring, serendipitous interactions that lead to innovations that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. None of that happens online well. And so how do you create those environments? to make it happen.
Yeah, let's get back to making some money for your book here. We got work to do, my friend.
Have we even gotten the title in yet? So
no, let's do it.
The transformation myth leading your organization through uncertain times. And the transformation myth, well, one, we were riffing off the theme of our previous book, which was the technology fallacy. But the transformation myth, I sort of describe them as debunking the two lies of digital transformation. The technology fallacy debunked the myth that in order to engage in digital transformation, you had to it necessarily involved implementing new technologies. And in fact, what we found was that sometimes the more important changes were the strategic, the organizational, the leadership, et cetera, and didn't involve technology at all. The transformation myth is this debunking the idea that transformation is a one and done thing, that you transform and then you are transformed. In what is now this chaotic world, disruptions are the new normal. And in our epilogue, we say, look, it looks like September 2020 is going to be when we're done with this. But literally, we said, but there's some uncertainty about some variants out there right now. And if we're wrong, it doesn't disprove our book. In fact, it underscores that point, that it's all about constant transformation. It's all about ongoing transformation. And the great example, the quote I told you I would come back to, we were interviewing the CIO of CarMax. And he referenced an interview he did in 2016 when he took over. And in that interview, he had a quote. He said, "I don't know what the world is going to be like in 3 to 5 years. All I know is it's going to be characterized by constant change. And I need to build an organization that is capable of adaptation and change at scale and at speed." And he said, and that has worked really well for digital change. It worked really well for COVID as well. And so I think that's sort of the core message is disruption and change is the new normal. Our old organizational structures are not good enough, are not flexible enough to make that happen. So we need to sort of invent new organizations. We need to invent new leadership styles. We need to invent new ways of working that can be adaptable to dealing with these multiple disruptions wherever they come from.
That sounded so good. I mean,
that's my go-to pitch, man.
Yeah, that's you said it so eloquently. I was like, this is making his media rounds, but that is really good advice though.
Yeah, I mean, and it also is true.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, I've become more and more convinced that, this is in fact it. And this is where I think the danger is. And I think this is where this book, we were really worried about when the book was going to come out, because it's like, is this all going to be over and be yesterday's news? Is something else going to happen that's going to like completely make what we've said irrelevant? And in fact, I think September 2020, in the midst of the resurgence of Delta, is the exact perfect time for this book to come out, because the lessons are still 2021. Did I say 2020?
Yeah.
Look, I've lost total track of what year it is.
You know what, buddy?
18 months.
When you came on and you were like, yeah, last time we talked, I was like, we talked during COVID. Time just kind of like blends together. I couldn't remember if I talked to you before COVID or after. But I remember you because I remember how I even met you is we had some interns do some research on like the best technology books, and they gave me a list, and I went through and read all the descriptions, and out of all of them, I was like, that's the one. The technology fallacy. I was like, that's the one. That description means that guy knows what he's talking about. Let's have him on the show.
Well, I have to give a shout out because my brother-in-law is a listener of your podcast, and I got a text from him, was like, holy crap, you were on the Modern CTO podcast. It's like, yes, I actually do this stuff, man. So shout out to John Durkee there. So as he's listening to the next time, but I got to get back on my tirade. My tirade was, the Delta variant is the perfect time for this book to come out, because we are still in disruption. It's emphasized that point, that disruption is the new normal. And there's still runway for leaders to start thinking about what they want their organization to be like going forward. And if you're thinking about going back to, December of 2019, don't. I think that's going to be the kiss of death for companies. And I see so many just clamoring for that. what you need to do is sort of bake in what you've learned over the past 18 months to make your organization stronger, more nimble, more stable going forward.
Yeah. And
so there's my sales pitch.
There's still, I'm curious. So you think January 22 will be the new normal. And now my question is, when you were thinking about those, or at least it'll be more stable. When you were thinking about those, did you consider two things I've seen? The first one is the chip shortage, which I think that's pretty well publicized. So I won't go too deep into that one. But the second one is something that I experienced personally. So I went to go buy this, build this garage on a property, right? And you just pour a foundation and it's steel garage. And I'd gotten a quote and I went back and it was like almost 200% more expensive. And they said the price of steel has gone up like 200-300% because here's what happened when everyone contracted at first. We all get that. And when we're in, professional services, that looks different than when you're in manufacturing. They just like go home and they stop producing steel.
Yep.
And then they came back, right? But there was such a massive demand for everyone buying grills, doing these home projects. And then so it created this huge demand of the steel, and they didn't have like a ton of inventory because they had stopped working for several months. And now the price has shot up. So like when you're thinking of those dates, you think that's how long it's going to take for like the ripples to kind of even out?
Gosh, that's so hard to say because supply chains globally are just so screwed up in all sorts of weird industries. I do think companies are going forward are going to focus more on supply chain flexibility and robustness rather than just supply chain efficiency, because we've underscored the importance of that. I don't know, maybe chips are still going to be an issue. But I think, and when I say we're getting back to normal, I think I'm seeing it more of like offices can open back up and you can start to get back to normal. And I still could be wrong. I mean, Lord knows at this point, I'm not making any predictions.
Okay. So you're saying
whenever it is,
when you were saying that information, obviously I took it as like business model too, but you were kind of delivering it as the social. There's only really so many options for the humans, right? It's either in office, not in office, hybrid. And so by January 2022, that should be figured out.
Well, not figured out, but then you will be, I'm hoping at that point, COVID isn't going to be the determining factor at that point. We will have, people who are going to get it will have gotten it. The people who are going to get vaccinated will have gotten it. And people who are going to die will have died. Like it's going to work itself out so that whatever January 2022 is the point where the new COVID equilibrium will be. Does it always go away? Who knows? Are we dealing with it like the flu? Who knows? But I think at that point, and again, we could see a new variant. Let's hope not.
Did you see the latest one? The MU or whatever?
Yeah. Some of this I would take all with a grain of salt. That you can sell an article.
Yeah,
you can sell plenty of articles just talking about the latest variant of fear.
Well, one thing's for sure is that every kid growing up today, in their science class, they will whether they're in the science class paying attention or not, they will understand the concept that like viruses mutate.
Yes. Yes. That lesson is going to stick for a long time from here on out.
Oh yeah. I looked it up. I Googled when I saw that like Mew thing. I was like, oh, is this real? And then there was a list of like there's like 15 different variants. It's just some get popular enough to hit our media circuit. Right.
Yeah.
And so we were like, oh, there's one and then there's two. It's like, there's this whole spectrum that you can go look up of all these different.
Yeah. And I think there are actually multiple types of the Delta variant too, like sub variants. So this is not, I don't know any more than the next guy. I just read what I see on, of course, Twitter has been a really good source, of information because like there are some real bona fide scientists out there tweeting their hearts away about sort of the latest and the greatest. And so I found it to be a really helpful source of it. You got to vet to make sure that people know what they're talking about because it's also a huge source of misinformation. But I've learned a lot sort of following knowledgeable people on Twitter about this.
Yeah, I like that too. I like that's just a byproduct of the internet as well. Just being able to follow these people in real time versus waiting for a publication cycle. But
absolutely.
Speaking of publication cycles, how can we buy your book?
It is available now on for pre-order. Well, I don't know when this is coming out. So it will be available on September 28th, I believe, on Amazon or at a bookseller near you. The transformation myth, leading your organization through uncertain times.
Are you sure it's not available right now? Because
I think it's certainly available for pre-order.
Oh, that's what it was. Because I looked it up. I was looking at it yesterday, and I was like, there was a buy button on it. So,
and did you click that buy button, Joel?
I did not. I said I'm going to talk to him first to see if it's any good.
Also, this episode is going to come out in October, so the book is out.
It is out.
It is out. There is a question I have for you about the book. I do. Okay. I actually have a question about the book.
Got it. That works. Well, if you send me your address, I will be happy to send you an autographed copy of the Transformation Myth.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna purchase a copy, and then you can send me an autographed copy, because I want to contribute to you and your success and your team. And I know what it's like to write a book. It's a lot of work, and it's expensive, and it's a big part of life. So I want to support that. And I love that you wrote another one, and so many people approach me and they're like, I'm going